The wine hit my face before I could process what was happening. Cold, red, expensive Cabernet, the same vintage from our wedding 7 years earlier. I could smell the oak and berries as it dripped down my suit, my tie, pooling on the $800 million contract I'd just signed. 43 people sat frozen in that boardroom, the only sound the wine still dripping onto the mahogany table. My wife Sarah stood over me, her hand still gripping the empty glass, her chest heaving with rage, mascara starting to run down her cheeks. Her voice cut through the silence like a blade. "You think you can steal my company? You think I'm just going to stand here and let you do this?" And in that moment, staring up at the woman I'd spent 12 years building a life with, I had no idea that everything was about to unravel in ways I couldn't possibly imagine. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. My name is Marcus, and I need to take you back to understand how we got here, because this story isn't what you think it is. 12 years ago, I was a 30-year-old software engineer with a dream and not much else. I'd been working at a mid-sized tech company in Silicon Valley, watching other people build empires while I collected a steady paycheck and told myself I was playing it safe. But I had an idea for security software that I knew could change everything. The problem was, ideas don't pay rent, and they certainly don't silence that voice in your head, telling you you're crazy for giving up stability. I quit my job in March of 2013 with $15,000 in savings, a detailed business plan I'd worked on for 6 months, and a plan to build TechVault Security. I worked out of my garage in San Jose, coding 16 hours a day, living on instant ramen and black coffee that I'd reheat in the microwave 3 times before finishing it. The garage smelled like motor oil and desperation. My neighbor's dog would bark every morning at 6, which became my alarm clock. 6 months in, I was broke, exhausted, and ready to give up. I had a working prototype, but no clients, no funding, and no idea how to actually run a business. That's when I met Sarah. We met at a tech networking event in San Francisco in September 2013. I almost didn't go because I couldn't really afford the $40 entrance fee, but a friend had given me a free ticket, telling me I needed to get out of my garage before I lost my mind completely. Sarah was there representing a small consulting firm where she worked as a senior analyst. She was 28, confident, and had this way of listening that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. When I mentioned what I was working on during a panel discussion, her eyes lit up in a way that made me want to keep talking. After the panel, she found me, and we talked for 2 hours. She asked questions that made me think differently about my product, questions I hadn't considered. She saw applications I'd missed. She understood the vision immediately and even improved on it. She introduced me to 3 people that night who ended up becoming crucial connections. 3 months later, we were dating. It started casually, coffee meetings that turned into dinners, dinners that turned into weekends. 6 months after that, in March 2014, she made a decision that would change both our lives. She quit her consulting job to help me full-time with TechVault. I remember trying to talk her out of it. I told her I couldn't pay her, that I was barely surviving, that it was too risky. She'd smiled and said, "Marcus, I believe in this. I believe in you. We'll figure it out together." Sarah was incredible. While I handled the technical development, buried in code and architecture diagrams, she managed everything else. She talked to potential clients with an ease I could never match. She handled our finances, stretching every dollar until it screamed. She created our marketing materials, our pitch decks, our entire public face. And somehow, she kept both of us fed, motivated, and sane when everything seemed impossible. I remember one night in July 2014, sitting on the floor of my garage at 2 a.m, both of us exhausted. We'd just lost what would have been our first major client to a competitor. Sarah had been on the phone for 3 hours trying to save the deal, but it fell through anyway. I was ready to quit. I told her maybe this wasn't meant to be. Maybe I should just get a normal job again. She'd looked at me with these fierce eyes and said, "One setback doesn't define us, Marcus. Tomorrow, we start over." And we did. Sarah had this gift for connecting with people, for making them believe in what we were building even when I barely believed in it myself. Our first major client came through a connection Sarah made at a conference in October 2014, then another in December, then 5 more in the first quarter of 2015. By mid-2015, we had a real business. We moved out of the garage into a small office in Mountain View. We hired our first 2 employees. We had revenue, actual revenue that could pay salaries. By 2016, we got married in a small ceremony in Napa Valley, surrounded by friends, family, and several of our early clients who'd become like family too. The wedding was simple but perfect. I can still remember every detail. The vineyard smell of grapes and earth, the way the sunset painted everything gold. Sarah's dress was simple and elegant, and when she walked down the aisle, I thought my heart might actually stop. I remember Sarah's vows. She'd written them herself, and her voice shook slightly as she read them. She said, "Marcus, I'm not just marrying you. I'm marrying your dreams, your vision, your impossible goals. We're going to build something extraordinary together, not because it'll be easy, but because it'll be ours." I promised her the same. Promised we'd always be partners, always be equals, always face everything together. At the time, I meant every word. And we did build something extraordinary. Over the next 9 years, TechVault Security grew from a garage startup to a company with 300 employees and offices in San Francisco, Austin, Seattle, Boston, and Denver. Our security software was being used by major corporations, hospitals, government agencies, and financial institutions. We were profitable, respected in the industry, and getting acquisition offers almost monthly, which we'd always turned down because we weren't ready to sell our baby. Sarah and I worked side by side through all of it. She'd started as my girlfriend helping out, but over the years, she'd become our chief operations officer. The transformation was gradual, but remarkable. She built our entire operational infrastructure from scratch, created systems that other companies started copying. She hired most of our key people, conducted over 200 interviews personally in our first 5 years. She established the company culture that made employees actually want to work for us. That kept our retention rate at 85% when the industry average was barely 50%. She could walk into any of our 5 offices and know everyone's name, know their kids' names, know what they were working on. We were a team in every sense that mattered. At home, we'd talk about the company over dinner, our dining table covered in laptops and notepads. In bed at night, we'd strategize about our next moves, about which markets to expand into, about how to handle difficult clients or personnel issues. Our entire lives were intertwined with TechVault. We didn't have kids, partly because we were too busy, partly because we kept saying, maybe next year, and partly because the company felt like our baby. We'd joke about it sometimes, usually late at night, when we were too tired to be serious. Sarah would say, "TechVault is our difficult teenager who never moves out and constantly needs money." We'd laugh, but there was truth in it. The company was the center of our universe, the thing we'd built together, the proof that our partnership worked. Then in late 2024, everything changed. Davidson Industries, a massive tech conglomerate with annual revenue over $50 billion, approached us with an acquisition offer, $800 million. When their CEO, Richard Davidson, first said the number, I thought I'd misheard him. It was more money than I'd ever imagined possible when I was eating ramen in my garage 12 years earlier, wondering if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. Sarah and I sat in our living room the night we got the offer, on the couch we'd bought at IKEA, back when we could barely afford furniture, just staring at each other in silence for what felt like an hour. The number seemed unreal, like something from a movie. Finally, I asked her, "Do we do this? Do we sell?" She'd taken my hand, and I could feel her trembling slightly. She said, "We built this together. Whatever we decide together. But Marcus, think about it. We could finally breathe. We could travel like we've always talked about. We could start a family if we still want to. We could figure out who we are when we're not constantly putting out fires." We spent weeks discussing it, weighing the pros and cons at our kitchen table, filling notebooks with lists. We talked to our board members, to our key employees, to other founders who'd sold their companies. We asked ourselves if we were ready to let go of the thing that had defined us for over a decade. Finally, in January 2025, we agreed. We'd sell TechVault, take the money, and finally have the freedom to live our lives instead of just building our company. The decision felt right, exciting, like the start of a new chapter. The deal took 4 months to finalize. 4 months of lawyers, accountants, due diligence, and endless paperwork that made my eyes cross. Every aspect of TechVault was examined under a microscope. Our code, our contracts, our employee agreements, our intellectual property, our financial records going back to day one. Sarah and I divided the responsibilities because there was simply too much for one person to handle. I handled the technical side, spending hours with Davidson's engineering team, walking them through our systems and code base, explaining architectural decisions I'd made years ago. Sarah managed the operational transition, preparing our employees for the change, documenting all her processes and frameworks, and ensuring that the transition would be smooth. She created a 200-page operational manual that documented everything she'd built over the years. I remember watching her work on it late one night, her face illuminated by her laptop screen, and thinking how lucky I was to have her as a partner. April 15th, 2025 was set as the closing date. We planned a signing ceremony at our lawyer's office, a celebration of everything we'd built. We invited our key employees, the ones who'd been with us from the early days. We invited our board members who'd believed in us when others hadn't. We invited the Davidson Industries leadership team. We ordered expensive catering and champagne. It was supposed to be our victory lap, the culmination of 12 years of hard work, sacrifice, sleepless nights, and unwavering partnership. I had a speech prepared. I'd worked on it for weeks, wanting to get it just right. I was going to talk about the journey, about the garage days, about all the people who'd helped us along the way, and I was going to thank Sarah, my partner in everything, for making all of this possible. But I never gave that speech. The morning of the signing, Sarah seemed off. She was quiet during breakfast, barely touching her coffee, staring out the window at the San Francisco fog rolling in. I asked if she was nervous. She'd smiled, but it was tight, didn't reach her eyes. She said, "I just want to make sure everything goes smoothly. This is the biggest day of our lives." I'd kissed her forehead, tasted the salt of nervous sweat, and told her everything would be perfect, that we'd earned this moment, that by tonight we'd be $800 million richer and could start the next chapter of our lives. If only I'd known how wrong I was. We arrived at our lawyer Tom's office at 9:45 a.m. for the 10 a.m. ceremony. The conference room was impressive in that way expensive law offices always are. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown San Francisco, the morning light streaming in and making everything look golden and full of promise. A massive table made of reclaimed wood with leather chairs that probably cost more than my first car, and stacks of documents waiting to be signed, each page representing a piece of the life we'd built. Richard Davidson, the CEO of Davidson Industries, arrived with his team right on time. He was in his late 50s, silver-haired, wearing a suit that probably cost $10,000. Everyone was in good spirits, shaking hands, making small talk about traffic and weather and plans for the weekend. Our head of engineering was there, crying happy tears. Our first employee, David, who'd taken a chance on us when we could barely pay minimum wage, stood in the corner looking proud. Tom, our lawyer who'd been with us since 2015, looked relieved that we'd finally reached this moment after months of intense work. Tom started the ceremony by explaining what we'd be signing: purchase agreements, transfer documents, tax forms, non-compete clauses, transition agreements. There were 47 documents in total, each one necessary, each one reviewed by multiple lawyers. He walked through each one methodically, his voice taking on that particular tone lawyers use when they want to sound both authoritative and boring. Sarah sat to my right, her hands folded on the table in front of her. I noticed they were clenched, knuckles white. I reached over and squeezed her hand, trying to be reassuring. She squeezed back, but her hand was ice cold. I noticed her frown slightly when Tom mentioned something about sole proprietor while explaining the third document, but she didn't say anything. I felt a flutter of nervousness in my stomach, but pushed it down. Everything was fine. This was just legal jargon. I signed the first document with the expensive fountain pen Tom had provided, then the second. Tom kept explaining in his methodical way, and I kept signing. We were about halfway through the stack, maybe 20 documents down, when Tom paused. He looked at Sarah, then at me, then back at his papers. I saw him take a breath, like he was steeling himself. He cleared his throat and said, "Just to clarify for the record, Mrs. Thompson, while you've been instrumental in TechVault's success and will receive your executive profit-sharing bonus, As outlined in your employment agreement, the sale proceeds will be distributed to Mr. Thompson as the sole registered owner of the company. The room went silent. Not just quiet, but completely silent in that way that makes your ears ring. I heard someone's phone buzz in their pocket. I heard the HVAC system humming. I heard my own heartbeat. Sarah's head snapped toward Tom, her neck muscles tense. Her voice was barely a whisper when she said, "What did you say?" Tom looked uncomfortable, shifting in his chair. He glanced at me, clearly hoping I'd jump in to explain, his eyes almost pleading. But I was frozen. My mouth had gone dry. My tongue felt thick. I'd known this moment was coming, had been dreading it for weeks, but I'd kept telling myself I'd find the right time to talk to Sarah about it before the signing. I'd run out of time. And now it was happening in the worst possible way. Sarah turned to look at me, and I'll never forget the expression on her face. Confusion first, her eyebrows drawn together, her head tilted slightly. Then something else creeping in, something that looked like the first stirrings of horror. "Marcus, tell him he's wrong. Tell him we're co-owners." I opened my mouth, but no words came out. My throat had closed up. The truth was written all over my face, in my inability to speak, in the way I couldn't meet her eyes. The room felt like it was shrinking, the walls closing in. "Marcus." Her voice was stronger now, with an edge I'd never heard before, sharp enough to cut. "Tell them we're 50-50 partners. Tell them this is our company." Tom, trying to be helpful, or maybe just trying to fill the horrible silence, pulled out the incorporation documents from a folder. His hands were shaking slightly. "Mrs. Thompson, when TechVault was founded in March 2013, it was registered as a sole proprietorship under Marcus Thompson's name. You joined the company in March 2014 as an employee and have since held various executive positions, including your current role as Chief Operations Officer. But according to the corporate structure, you're not listed as an owner or shareholder." Sarah grabbed the documents from Tom's hands so fast he flinched. Her eyes scanned the pages frantically, her hands shaking so badly the papers rattled. I watched her face change as she read, watched her go through every stage of realization. Confusion turned to disbelief, her mouth opening slightly. Then to something that looked like physical pain, her face crumpling. Then to a horror so profound it made my chest ache. She flipped through the pages, searching for her name, for proof that Tom was wrong. She found it on page 3, highlighted in yellow by some helpful paralegal, under Key Employees. Not co-founder, not partner, not owner, not even shareholder. Key employee. Just another person on the payroll. 12 years, she whispered, her voice breaking. Then louder, filling the room. 12 years, Marcus. I gave up my career. I worked 80-hour weeks. I sacrificed everything. I built this company with you. I thought this was ours. Her voice was rising with each sentence, getting louder, more raw, pain turning to anger. I thought we were partners. I thought this was our dream, our future, our legacy. I finally found my voice, though it came out hoarse, pathetic. "Sarah, I can explain. We need to talk about this privately. Please, let's go somewhere, and..." "Privately?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it, just a sharp, bitter sound that made everyone in the room flinch. "You let me walk into this room thinking I was about to sell my company. You let me spend 4 months preparing for this moment. You let me create transition plans and operational manuals and talk to our employees about the future. And you want to talk about it privately." She stood up so abruptly her chair fell backward with a crash that made everyone jump. That's when she grabbed her wine glass. It was filled with a 2015 Cabernet, the same vintage from our wedding, which now felt like a cruel irony. I saw it happening in slow motion, but couldn't move fast enough to stop it. Her hand wrapping around the stem, the glass rising, the deep red wine catching the light as it arced through the air. Then the cold shock of it hitting my face, splashing into my eyes, my nose, my mouth. The expensive wine I could never afford back in the garage days now dripping down my $2,000 suit. It splashed across the contracts, the ink beginning to blur and run, $800 million worth of documents now stained red. Sarah's voice was ice, colder than I'd ever heard it, each word precise and cutting. "You don't get to steal my life's work and call it a misunderstanding. You don't get to erase 12 years of my life and expect me to smile and sign papers and pretend everything is fine." Then she walked out, just turned and left the conference room, her heels clicking on the marble floor, the sound echoing. She left the building, left me sitting there with wine dripping off my chin, while 43 people stared in stunned silence. Through the window, I watched her get into her car and drive away, tires squeaking on the parking garage concrete. Richard Davidson was the first to speak, his voice carefully neutral. Perhaps we should reschedule the signing? It seems there are some internal matters that need to be resolved first. Tom quickly ushered everyone out of the conference room, except for me and Richard Davidson. The other attendees filed out quietly, avoiding eye contact with me, whispering to each other as they left. I could imagine what they were saying. Our head of engineering looked heartbroken. David, our first employee, looked confused and disappointed. I sat there trying to wipe wine off my face with cloth napkins that smelled like laundry detergent, feeling like my entire world had just collapsed around me. My hands were shaking. My suit was ruined. My marriage might be ruined. Everything was ruined. Richard, to his credit, was diplomatic. He'd probably seen plenty of deals fall apart, though maybe not quite this dramatically. He said, "Marcus, I think you need to sort this out with your wife before we proceed. Take whatever time you need. This is clearly complicated." After he left, Tom sat down across from me, his expression a mixture of sympathy and frustration, and something that looked like anger. His jaw was tight. "Marcus, I told you 3 weeks ago that you needed to have this conversation with Sarah. I explicitly warned you this could happen. I told you she needed to understand the ownership structure before the signing." I knew he was right. Tom had brought up the ownership structure during one of our prep meetings in late March. He'd explained that since Sarah wasn't a legal owner, she wouldn't be signing the sale documents. Only I would. He'd asked me point blank if Sarah understood that. I'd assured him she did, told him we'd discussed it, told him everything was fine. That was a lie, a complete, cowardly lie. The truth was, I'd never told Sarah about the ownership structure because I'd never thought it mattered. We were married, we'd built TechVault together. In my mind, what was mine was hers. The legal paperwork seemed like a technicality, bureaucratic nonsense that didn't reflect the reality of our partnership. But sitting there with wine soaking through my shirt, the smell of it making me nauseous, I realized how naive and stupid and fundamentally wrong that thinking had been. Sarah hadn't just been hurt by the ownership structure. She'd been humiliated in front of everyone who mattered to her professionally. She'd been blindsided in the worst possible moment. And I'd let it happen because I was too much of a coward to have an uncomfortable conversation. Tom asked me where Sarah might have gone. I tried calling her phone. It went straight to voicemail. I tried texting. "Sarah, please, I'm so sorry. Let me explain." No response. The message showed as delivered, but not read. I tried again. "I love you. Please talk to me." Still nothing. I called her sister Emma, who lived across the bay in Berkeley. Emma answered on the third ring, and I could immediately tell from her tone that Sarah had already called her. Emma had never liked me much, always thought Sarah was too good for me, and her voice confirmed she was done being polite. "Let me guess," Emma said, her voice dripping with contempt. "You need help finding my sister because you just destroyed her in front of half of San Francisco's tech community? Because you've been lying to her for 12 years? I tried to explain that it wasn't like that there had been a misunderstanding, that I'd never meant to hurt her. Emma cut me off. "A misunderstanding? Marcus, you let my sister believe she was a business owner for 12 years. You let her sacrifice her entire career for what she thought was her company. That's not a misunderstanding. That's betrayal." Her voice got quiet, more dangerous. "Sarah's here. She's not ready to talk to you. Don't come to my house, Marcus. She needs space, and if you show up here, I swear I'll call the police." Then she hung up. I sat in that empty conference room for another hour, trying to figure out what to do, replaying the scene over and over in my mind, wondering if I could have handled it differently. Tom eventually left, saying he'd reschedule the signing once I'd sorted things out, though his tone suggested he thought that might never happen. The cleaning staff came in to wipe wine off the table and floor, the smell of cleaning solution mixing with the wine smell. I apologized to them profusely, which felt absurd given everything else, but I didn't know what else to say. They avoided looking at me directly, clearly uncomfortable. Finally, around 2 p.m., I drove home to our apartment in Pacific Heights. The drive felt surreal, the city going about its normal business while my life fell apart. People walking dogs, getting coffee, living their normal lives. Walking into our empty home felt like walking into a tomb. Sarah's coffee cup was still in the sink from that morning, lipstick stain on the rim. Her jacket was hanging by the door. Her book was on the coffee table, bookmark halfway through. Everything looked normal, but nothing was. Nothing would ever be normal again. I spent the next 2 days in a fog trying to reach Sarah. I called her phone 20 times. I sent dozens of texts. I emailed her. Every message went unanswered. Emma sent me one text message on day 2. She needs time. Stop calling, stop texting, stop trying to explain, just stop. But I couldn't stop. I needed Sarah to understand that I'd never meant to hurt her, that I'd just been stupid and careless, not malicious. I needed her to know that, in my mind, we'd always been partners, even if the legal documents didn't reflect it. On the 3rd day Tom called. His voice was tense. He said that Richard Davidson was getting impatient. The deal was time-sensitive, tied to Davidson Industries' quarterly earnings and board approval timeline. They needed to know if we were moving forward or not. If not, they'd need to pull the offer and move on to other acquisition targets. I told Tom I couldn't sign anything until I'd talked to Sarah, until we'd worked this out. Tom was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Marcus, I need to tell you something. Something I probably should have mentioned earlier, but I was bound by client confidentiality, and I wasn't sure it was my place. But given the situation, I think you need to know." My stomach tightened. I could hear the seriousness in his voice. "What is it?" Tom explained that during the due diligence process, Davidson Industries had done extensive research on TechVault's leadership. Not just the technical assets and the software and the client list, but the people. They'd interviewed clients, talked to industry analysts, reviewed press coverage, examined every aspect of our business. What he'd discovered was surprising, at least to me. Davidson Industries wasn't primarily interested in TechVault because of my software. They were interested because of Sarah. My mouth went dry. "What do you mean?" Tom continued, his words careful and measured. "Over the past 3 years, Sarah has revolutionized your operational systems. She's created proprietary frameworks for client management, employee development, and operational efficiency that are considered cutting edge in the industry. Other companies have been studying what she's built. She's been invited to speak at conferences. She's been written about in industry publications. And according to what I've seen in the due diligence files, other companies have tried to poach her multiple times, offering huge salaries and equity packages. I'd known about some of this, but I'd never really thought about what it meant. I'd been so focused on the technical side, on the software, that I'd assumed that was what mattered most." Tom went on. "Sarah turned down all those offers, every single one. I've seen the emails in her file. Recruiters from Google, from Apple, from Microsoft, all trying to bring her on board. One offer from Amazon was for $3 million a year, plus stock options. She turned it down, telling the recruiter she was happy building TechVault with her husband. She chose loyalty to your partnership over her own advancement." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Sarah had never told me about these offers. Never mentioned that she'd had opportunities to leave. Tom continued, and his next words changed everything I thought I understood about our company. Davidson Industries had a different strategy. Instead of just trying to hire Sarah, they decided to buy the entire company. That way they'd get her expertise, her systems, her frameworks, and her commitment all at once. "Marcus, I've seen internal Davidson memos that weren't supposed to be shared with you. One of them explicitly states, and I'm quoting here, 'Sarah Thompson is the primary asset in this acquisition. We're essentially paying $500 million for her operational frameworks and leadership, and $300 million for the software and existing infrastructure. They value her contributions at more than 60% of the purchase price.'" I couldn't speak. Couldn't process what he was telling me. Tom let the silence hang for a moment, then continued. "If she walks away from this deal, if she refuses to be the part of the transition, there's a good chance Davidson will reduce their offer substantially or pull it entirely. They're not buying TechVault for your code, Marcus. They're buying it for what Sarah built." I hung up and sat in stunned silence in our living room, staring at a photo on the wall from our wedding day. We looked so happy, so sure of ourselves, so confident in our partnership. For 12 years, I'd thought I was the visionary, the technical genius, the reason TechVault succeeded. I'd thought my software was the heart of the company, the thing that made us valuable. Sarah was important, of course, but in my mind, she was the support system, the operational manager, the person who kept things running while I did the real creative work. But what if I'd had it backward the whole time? What if Sarah was the real reason we'd succeeded, and I'd just been too blind and arrogant and self-centered to see it? What if the company I thought I'd built was actually the company she'd built, and I'd just provided the initial code? That night, I did something I probably should have done years ago. I went through TechVault's history systematically, with fresh eyes, trying to understand Sarah's actual contributions, rather than what I'd assumed they were. I pulled up old client contracts from our shared drive. I read through them carefully, looking at how we'd landed each account. Almost all of our early clients, maybe 80% of them, had come through Sarah's network, or because of relationships she'd built. Our first 10 clients were all people she'd known from her consulting days or met at conferences. I looked at employee retention data. Our retention rate was 85%, which was 40% higher than the industry average. I read through exit interviews from the handful of people who had left. Almost all of them mentioned Sarah's leadership, her mentorship, the culture she'd created. Several people had noted that they'd stayed longer than they'd planned, specifically because of Sarah. I reviewed our operational metrics. Since Sarah had implemented her management frameworks in 2018, our efficiency had increased by 65%, while our costs had decreased by 30%. These weren't small improvements. These were the numbers that made TechVault attractive to acquirers, that proved we were well run, that showed we could scale. I found emails from our investors praising Sarah's strategic thinking. One from 2019 said, "Sarah is the secret weapon here. Marcus has built good software, but Sarah has built a real business. Without her, this would just be another tech startup that crashes and burns." I found industry articles about TechVault. A piece in TechCrunch from 2022 focused almost entirely on Sarah's operational innovations. Wired had done a feature in 2023 about the most innovative COOs in tech, and Sarah had been number 3 on the list. I found a Harvard Business School case study about TechVault's success, published in 2023, that I'd never even read. I opened it now, and the abstract made my stomach sink. This case examines how Sarah Thompson's revolutionary operational frameworks transformed TechVault Security from a promising startup into an industry leader. While founder Marcus Thompson's technical contributions provided the foundation, it was Thompson's strategic vision and execution excellence that drove the company's success. How had I missed all of this? How had I been so blind? The answer was uncomfortable but clear. I'd been so focused on my own work, so convinced that the technology was the heart of the company, so sure of my own importance, that I'd failed to see the full picture. I'd let my ego convince me that I was the star and Sarah was the supporting player, when the reality was exactly the opposite. Sarah hadn't just helped me build my dream. She'd built something entirely her own within TechVault, something more valuable than what I'd created, and I'd been too self-absorbed to notice. And I'd let her walk into that conference room believing she was a co-owner, only to have her discover in the most humiliating way possible that legally she owned nothing. That in the eyes of the law, she was just an employee, no different from our receptionist or our junior developers. Think about that for a moment. Put yourself in Sarah's shoes. You spend 12 years building something, sacrificing your own career and opportunities, working endless hours, creating systems and frameworks that become industry leading, turning down better offers because you believe in what you're building with your partner. And then you discover that legally you own 0% of it, that your partner, the person you trusted most in the world, never made you an actual owner. How would you feel? Can you even imagine that kind of betrayal? Would you have thrown the wine, or would you have done something worse? The more I thought about it, the more I realized I'd failed Sarah in the most fundamental way possible. Not just because of the legal paperwork, though that was bad enough, but because I'd failed to see her, to truly value what she brought to our partnership. I'd taken her for granted in the worst possible way, assuming she'd always be there, always be supportive, always be content with being in my shadow. On the 4th day, I drove to Emma's house in Berkeley, even though she'd told me not to come. I didn't care anymore. I needed to talk to Sarah face to face. I needed her to see my face when I apologized. Needed her to understand how sorry I was. Emma answered the door with her arms crossed, her face hard. "She doesn't want to see you. I told you not to come." I begged. I told Emma I'd stand on the porch all night if I had to. I told her I'd sleep in my car in her driveway. I wasn't leaving until Sarah agreed to talk to me, even if it took days. Emma sighed, looked at me with something that might have been pity, and went back inside. 5 minutes later, Sarah came to the door. She looked exhausted. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying. She was wearing sweatpants and one of Emma's old college t-shirts, and her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She'd lost weight in just 4 days, her cheeks hollower. We stared at each other for a long moment. Then Sarah said, her voice flat and emotionless, "You have 5 minutes. Talk." We sat on Emma's porch steps. It was late afternoon, and the evening air was starting to cool. I could hear kids playing basketball in a nearby driveway, their shouts and laughter a painful reminder that normal life was continuing while ours fell apart. Somewhere a dog was barking. A car drove by with music playing too loud. I started by apologizing. I told Sarah that walking her into that signing ceremony without explaining the ownership structure was the worst thing I'd ever done. I told her I'd been a coward, that I'd known for weeks I needed to have this conversation, but kept putting it off because I was scared of her reaction. I told her there was no excuse, no justification, nothing I could say that would make it okay. Sarah listened without interrupting, her face carefully neutral, her hands clasped in her lap. She wouldn't look at me, just stared straight ahead at the street. When I finished my apology, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, her voice eerily calm, "Why didn't you ever make me a legal partner, Marcus? In 12 years, why did that never happen? Walk me through every single reason, because I've been trying to understand, and I can't." I'd been dreading this question because the honest answer made me look terrible, exposed me in ways I wasn't ready for. But I owed her honesty. I owed her the truth, even if it destroyed what was left of us. I took a deep breath and explained. When I first incorporated TechVault in March 2013, it was just me. I was alone in that garage, working on software that might never see the light of day. Sarah didn't join full-time until March 2014, after we'd been dating for 6 months. At that point, I'd thought about adding her as a co-owner. The idea had crossed my mind. But I'd gotten advice from a lawyer I'd consulted, a guy I'd met at a networking event who gave me 30 minutes of free advice. He'd suggested waiting until we were married. He said mixing business and romantic relationships could get messy if things didn't work out, that I should protect myself until the relationship was more permanent. So I'd waited, telling myself I was being smart and cautious. Then we got married in 2016, and I'd fully intended to update the ownership structure. I'd even looked into it, asked Tom about the process. But by then, we had investors and a board of directors, and the corporate structure had gotten complicated. We'd raised our Series A funding in early 2016, and part of that deal involved very specific ownership percentages and voting rights. Tom had explained that changing the ownership structure would require board approval and could raise questions with investors about why I was diluting my stake. He'd told me it could signal instability, could make investors nervous, could jeopardize future funding rounds. He'd advised me to wait until after our Series B, which we were planning for 2017. So I waited again, then the Series B happened, and the same issues came up. And then we were preparing for Series C. And then we were focused on profitability and didn't need more funding. And somehow, years passed, and I kept telling myself I'd handle the paperwork eventually, that it wasn't urgent, that what mattered was our actual partnership, not the legal documents. Sarah's face had hardened as I explained this, her jaw clenching. "So, for 12 years, you chose not to make me a legal partner because it was inconvenient? Because it might complicate things with investors? Because it might require difficult conversations?" Her voice was rising now, emotion breaking through the calm facade. "Do you understand what you're telling me? You're saying that, for over a decade, you prioritized the comfort of your investors over recognizing me as an equal partner. You valued their opinions more than my contributions." I tried to explain that it wasn't like that I'd always considered us partners regardless of what the paperwork said, that in my mind there was no difference between us. But even as the words came out, I heard how hollow they sounded. Sarah stood up abruptly, started pacing on the small porch. "Do you understand what you've done to me, Marcus? Do you really understand?" Her voice was shaking now, tears streaming down her face. "I walked into that room thinking I was about to sell my company that I'd built with my own hands, my own mind, my own relationships. And I discovered, in front of 43 people, colleagues who respected me, clients who trusted me, employees who looked up to me, that I'm just an employee, a well-paid employee with profit sharing, but an employee nonetheless. She turned to face me, and the pain in her eyes was almost unbearable. Do you know how that feels? To realize that the person you love, the person you've sacrificed everything for, the person you trusted with your entire future, has never actually seen you as an equal partner. That every time I talked about our company or our dream or our success, I was living in a fantasy, that the legal reality was that it was your company, your dream, your success, and I was just along for the ride. I stood up too, trying to reach for her hand, but she pulled away like my touch burned her. Sarah, I do see you as a partner. I always have. The paperwork doesn't reflect that, but my feelings do. My intentions do. She laughed bitterly, wiping tears from her face with the back of her hand. Your feelings don't matter, Marcus. Legal reality matters. Paperwork matters. Actions matter, not intentions. If we got divorced tomorrow, I'd have no claim to TechVault. If you died tomorrow, I'd have no automatic right to the company we built together. If you decided to sell without telling me, I couldn't have stopped you. That's not partnership. That's employment with emotional manipulation. I didn't have a good response to that because she was absolutely right. The legal structure meant that despite everything Sarah had contributed, despite our marriage, despite 12 years of building something together, I had all the power and she had none. She'd been completely vulnerable and I'd never even thought about it. Sarah continued, her voice shaking with emotion. I turned down 3 job offers in the past 5 years, Marcus. Real offers with real equity, with board seats, with 7-figure salaries. Companies that actually wanted to make me a partner, legally and officially, not just emotionally. I turned them all down because I thought I already was a partner, because I thought we were building something together. This was news to me. My heart sank. What companies? Sarah named them, and each one hit like a punch. 2 were major tech firms that would have been incredible opportunities. One was Amazon, offering her a VP position with stock options that would be worth millions now. One was a prestigious consulting company, offering her the chance to build her own practice. Any of those positions would have given her the recognition, the ownership, the security she deserved. Why didn't you tell me about the offers? I asked, though I think I already knew the answer. She looked at me like I was incredibly dense. Because I wasn't interested, because I thought I was already exactly where I wanted to be, building a company with my husband, building our future together. The emphasis she put on "our" felt like a knife twisting. I thought we were partners, Marcus. I thought what we had was special. I thought we were building something that meant more than a paycheck or a title or equity percentages. I was wrong. I tried a different approach, desperate to make her understand. I told Sarah about what Tom had revealed, about how Davidson Industries was primarily interested in her contributions, about how her work was valued at over 60% of the acquisition price. I told her about the internal memos, about how they'd been studying her frameworks, about how they'd decided to buy the whole company just to get her. I thought maybe this would help her understand how much I valued her, how much everyone valued her. It had the opposite effect. Sarah's face went white, then red. Her hands clenched into fists. So you're telling me that the $800 million Davidson is willing to pay is largely because of my work, my frameworks, my client relationships, my operational innovations, the systems I spent years developing? I nodded, not seeing the trap I was walking into. And legally, I'm entitled to what? My profit-sharing bonus? I'd been meaning to discuss this with her, had the numbers prepared. Your profit-sharing agreement gives you 4% of the sale price. That's $32 million, Sarah. That's an incredible amount of money. That's more than either of us ever dreamed of having when we started. The look she gave me could have frozen fire. Her voice was deadly quiet when she spoke. $32 million for work that's worth over $500 million? 4% of the value I created? Less than 1/16 of what my contributions are actually worth? And you think that's fair? You think I should be grateful for that? I tried to explain that I'd been planning to split the money with her, regardless of what the legal document said, that I'd already talked to Tom about it, that once the sale went through, we'd both have plenty, that the specific percentages didn't matter because we were married and would share everything anyway, that I'd never intended for her to get less than half. Sarah shook her head slowly, a sad smile on her face. You still don't get it. This isn't about the money, Marcus. This is about respect. This is about recognition. This is about you seeing me as an actual equal partner instead of as your helper, your support system. The person who handles the boring operational stuff while you do the important technical work. She walked to the edge of the porch, hugging herself. I need to know something, and I need you to be completely brutally honest with me, because I'll know if you're lying. I waited, dreading whatever question was coming. Did you deliberately keep me off the ownership structure? Was this intentional? Did some part of you want to maintain all the control, all the power, all the decision-making authority? This was the question I'd been most afraid of, the one I'd been avoiding asking myself. The honest answer was complicated and made me look terrible, but I owed her the truth. I took a long breath and told Sarah the truth as best as I understood it, that no, it wasn't deliberately malicious at the start. I hadn't set out to exclude her or control her. But yes, as the years went on, there was a part of me that had liked being the sole owner, liked having the final say on everything, liked being the one whose name was on all the documents. Was that conscious? Was that intentional? I didn't know anymore. Maybe it had been unconscious. Maybe I'd deliberately not thought about it too hard, because examining it would have made me uncomfortable. Maybe I'd let the situation continue because confronting it would have required admitting that I'd been wrong, that I'd been unfair, that I'd been taking advantage of her trust. I told Sarah that somewhere along the way, I'd gotten comfortable with the power imbalance, even though I'd never consciously acknowledged it. That I'd failed her not through active malice, but through passive selfishness. Through cowardice, through taking the easy path instead of the right one. That I'd let our traditional gender dynamics play out without questioning them, let her be the supportive wife and me be the visionary founder because it was comfortable and familiar and I benefited from it. Sarah listened to all of this, tears running down her face. Then she asked me one more question, her voice barely above a whisper. If our situations were reversed, if I was the sole owner and you discovered you'd spent 12 years building my company while thinking it was ours, how would you feel? I tried to imagine it, really tried to put myself in Sarah's position, working 80-hour weeks for a company I thought was mine, only to discover I was just an employee, turning down better opportunities out of loyalty to a partnership that legally didn't exist. Watching my spouse sign away hundreds of millions of dollars that came largely from my work while I got a tiny fraction. Having that realization happen publicly in front of colleagues and clients and people whose respect I valued. The humiliation alone would be crushing, would make me want to disappear. But worse would be the betrayal, the fundamental breaking of trust. The realization that the person I trusted most had either deliberately excluded me or had been too careless and self-centered to include me. Either option would be devastating. The anger I would feel would be righteous, justified, impossible to contain. I told Sarah I couldn't fully imagine it, but I was starting to understand why she was so hurt and angry. That if I was in her position, I'd probably never forgive the person who'd done this to me. That I'd feel used, discarded, invisible. She nodded slowly, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. I need time, Marcus. I need to figure out what I want my life to look like going forward. And I need to do that without you pressuring me or trying to fix this with money or apologies or grand gestures. I asked if she was planning to divorce me, the words catching in my throat. Sarah's eyes filled with tears again, and she looked at me with such sadness, it broke my heart. I don't know. Right now, I don't know anything except that the life I thought I had doesn't exist. The partnership I thought we had was a fantasy I created in my own mind. I need to figure out what's real and what I just imagined, because I wanted to believe we were equals. I stood there on Emma's porch, watching my wife cry, knowing I'd caused this pain and not knowing how to fix it. Not sure if it could even be fixed. Finally, I said, the only thing I could think of that might help. Whatever you need, Sarah, time, space, distance, whatever you need to figure this out. I'll wait. I'll give you whatever you need, and I'll prove to you, if you'll let me, that I can be the partner you deserved from the beginning. She nodded, but didn't look at me, didn't say anything else. I left Berkeley and drove back to San Francisco in a daze, my mind replaying the conversation over and over. Seeing the pain in her eyes, hearing the betrayal in her voice. The apartment felt even emptier than before, filled with ghosts of who we used to be. I called Tom and told him to tell Davidson Industries that the deal was on hold indefinitely. Tom warned me that they might walk away, that we were risking losing $800 million. I told him I didn't care. I wasn't signing anything without Sarah. Some things were more important than money. A week passed, then another. Each day felt like a year. Sarah stayed at Emma's house, and I stayed in our apartment, going through old emails and photos and documents, trying to understand how we'd gotten here, trying to see the warning signs I'd missed. I barely ate. I barely slept. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning, reaching for Sarah, and remember, she wasn't there. On day 15, Emma called me. Her tone was still cold, but less hostile than before. She said Sarah had agreed to meet with me, but only if I agreed to certain conditions. First, we'd meet in a neutral location with Emma present as a buffer. Second, I'd listen without interrupting, no matter what Sarah said. Third, I'd come prepared to discuss specific next steps. Not just apologize again. And fourth, I'd respect whatever decision Sarah made about our marriage and our business relationship. I agreed immediately to all of it. We met at a coffee shop in Oakland the next day, a place neither of us had any history with. Sarah looked better than she had on Emma's porch 2 weeks earlier, more put together. She'd gotten her hair done, and she was wearing professional clothes, like she was dressed for a business meeting instead of a conversation with her husband. There was a hardness in her eyes I'd never seen before, a kind of steel that hadn't been there before all this happened. We got our coffees and sat at a table in the back corner, away from other customers. Emma sat with us, positioning herself slightly between Sarah and me, like a physical barrier. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. Sarah pulled out a folder and set it on the table between us. She said she'd spent the past 2 weeks doing research, talking to lawyers, talking to financial advisors, and figuring out her options. She'd discovered some things I needed to know, things that would change how I understood everything. First, she'd learned that Davidson Industries had actually approached her directly 18 months ago, in October 2023. They had offered her a position as their chief operating officer with a salary of $2.5 million per year. Equity in Davidson Industries worth approximately $10 million they stated their executive board, and full autonomy to build her own division. Sarah had turned them down without telling me because she'd thought she was already a COO and part owner of something better, something more meaningful. She'd chosen loyalty to what she believed was our partnership over her own advancement and financial gain. She pulled out a printed email from her folder and slid it across to me. It was from Richard Davidson himself, dated October 15th, 2023. The subject line was, "An opportunity worth considering." I read it, and my stomach sank. The offer was even better than she'd described, with performance bonuses that could have brought her total compensation to over $4 million in the first year alone. Second, she had discovered that several of TechVault's biggest clients had contracts that specifically named her as their primary point of contact, as a condition of doing business with us. These contracts included clauses stating that if she left the company, the clients had the right to terminate their agreements within 90 days. Sarah had copies of these contracts in her folder. She'd spent 2 weeks going through every client agreement we had. These clients represented about 40% of TechVault's annual revenue, roughly $12 million per year. If Sarah walked away, there was a very good chance they'd follow her, and TechVault's value would plummet. The Davidson deal would almost certainly fall apart, or at minimum be renegotiated at a much lower price. Third, and most surprising to me, she'd learned that Davidson Industries had done extensive, almost obsessive research on her specifically. Tom had given her access to some of the due diligence files after she'd threatened to hire her own lawyer and sue for access. There were reports analyzing her management style, her client relationships, her strategic thinking, even her personality and leadership approach. One file was titled Sarah Thompson Key Asset Analysis and was 47 pages long. One memo, which Sarah had highlighted in yellow, explicitly stated, "Sarah Thompson is the primary asset in this acquisition. The operational frameworks she has developed are industry-leading and could be applied across our entire portfolio of companies. We're essentially paying $500 million for Thompson and her systems, and $300 million for the software and existing client base. If Thompson refuses to be part of the transition or leaves shortly after acquisition, the value of this deal decreases by at least 60%. Sarah looked at me across the table, her expression unreadable. Do you understand what this means, Marcus? The company that Davidson wants to buy isn't really your company. It's mine, my work, my relationships, my innovations, my leadership. You built good software 12 years ago, but I built the business that made that software valuable. I built the company that's worth $800 million. I felt defensive, wanted to argue, wanted to explain that we'd built it together, that my technical contributions mattered too. But I'd promised to listen, so I forced myself to stay quiet and just nod. Sarah continued, her voice getting stronger. I talked to 3 different lawyers about my options. They all said the same thing. Legally, I have no claim to ownership. The corporate structure is clear, and I signed employment agreements that acknowledge my status as an employee, not an owner. But practically, I have tremendous leverage. If I refuse to stay on after the acquisition, if I take my client relationships and my operational knowledge and walk away, Davidson will almost certainly reduce their offer by 60% or more, or cancel the deal entirely. They might sue for breach of our sale agreement, but even if they won, they'd get maybe $300 million in damages instead of the $800 million deal they wanted. She paused to let that sink in, watching my face. I tried to keep my expression neutral, but inside I was reeling. Everything I'd thought I knew about TechVault's value, about why Davidson wanted to buy us, had been wrong. So here's what I've decided, Sarah said, pulling several documents out of her folder. I'm not interested in fighting you in court. I don't want to spend years in litigation trying to prove I deserve ownership, dragging our private lives through depositions and trials. But I'm also not interested in accepting whatever scraps you decide to give me out of guilt or obligation. Sarah pulled out 3 documents and laid them on the table. These are contracts from 3 companies that have made me offers in the past month. Since word got out about our deal falling apart, since people in the industry heard what happened at that signing ceremony, I've been contacted by firms that want to hire me. The lowest offer is $3 million per year, plus equity worth approximately $5 million. The highest is $5 million per year, 2% equity in a pre-IPO company currently valued at $500 million, which means my equity stake would be worth $10 million before they even go public, and a senior VP title with full operational control. My heart sank as I looked at the offers. These were serious companies making serious offers. Any one of these would set Sarah up for life, would give her the recognition and ownership she deserved. She was going to leave. She was going to take one of these offers and leave me behind. Sarah must have seen the devastation on my face because she almost smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. Don't worry, Marcus. I'm not taking any of these offers. Not because I'm staying with you, but because I've decided to do something else entirely, something that's completely mine. She pulled out one more document, and I could see it was a business registration form. I'm starting my own consulting firm. I've already registered the company. It's called Cornerstone Consulting. The name hit me like a punch. We'd always called TechVault our cornerstone, the foundation we were building our lives on. Now, Sarah was taking that and making it her own. I've already lined up 4 clients, she continued, her voice getting more confident, more excited. Companies that want to implement the operational frameworks I developed at TechVault. My lawyer says I'm legally allowed to do this because the frameworks aren't patented. And I developed them largely through my own expertise and industry knowledge, not through proprietary TechVault resources. I can't take your clients, but I can take my knowledge and my reputation. She looked at me directly, and there was pride in her eyes. I'm going to build something that's entirely mine, Marcus. Something where my name is on every document from day one. Something where nobody can ever tell me I'm just an employee. I wanted to be happy for her, wanted to celebrate her taking control of her life. But all I could feel was loss, the realization that Sarah was moving on without me. As for Davidson Industries, Sarah continued, her tone becoming more businesslike. I'm willing to honor the acquisition. I'll sign whatever paperwork confirms I'm not an owner, because legally I'm not, and I won't contest that. But I'm going to negotiate my own deal with them separately. If they want me to stay on for any transition period, if they want access to my frameworks and my knowledge, they'll need to pay me as an independent consultant, not as an employee who comes with the acquisition like furniture. She slid a paper across the table to me. It was a detailed proposal, professionally formatted. This is a proposal for how we split the $800 million. I'm not asking for half, Marcus. I'm asking for 40%. That's $320 million. That's my estimate of the fair market value of my contributions to TechVault, based on what Davidson's internal memos say I'm worth, and what my lawyers say I could potentially claim in court if I wanted to fight. You keep $480 million, which is more than fair given that you did build the original software and you were the legal owner. I looked at the number, $320 million. It was an enormous amount of money, but based on what Tom had told me about Davidson's valuation and what Sarah had just shown me, it seemed more than fair. It seemed generous that she wasn't asking for more. If you agree to this split, Sarah continued, I'll help make sure the Davidson deal goes through. I'll agree to a 6-month consulting arrangement with them to transition my systems and train their people. I'll maintain my client relationships during the transition to make sure they don't leave. And then, after 6 months, I'll step away completely and focus on building Cornerstone. I asked the question I was most afraid to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. What about us? What about our marriage? Sarah's face softened slightly, but not much. The steel in her eyes remained. I don't know, Marcus. I honestly don't know. I need time to figure out if I can forgive you, if I can trust you again. Right now, I'm not sure I can. Every time I think about that conference room, about sitting there while Tom explained I wasn't an owner, about 43 people watching me realize I'd been living a lie for 12 years, I feel humiliated all over again. Emma put her hand on Sarah's arm supportively, and Sarah took a breath before continuing. What I do know is that I can't be in a relationship where I'm not seen as an equal, where my contributions aren't valued at the same level as yours, where I'm expected to sacrifice everything while you maintain all the control and all the legal protection. That's not a partnership, and I won't accept it anymore. I wanted to argue, to tell her I did see her as an equal, that I'd learned my lesson, that I'd never take her for granted again. But I knew words didn't matter anymore, only actions would matter going forward. I looked at the proposal again. $320 million for Sarah, $480 million for me. 6 months of consulting for Davidson. Then we'd each go our separate ways professionally. I'll agree to the financial split, I said, my voice hoarse. But I need you to know something. I was wrong about everything. I didn't see you clearly. I didn't value you the way you deserved. And I'm sorry doesn't begin to cover it. Sarah nodded, but didn't say anything, her face still carefully neutral. I continued, needing to get the words out. I don't know if we can fix our marriage. I don't know if you can ever forgive me for what I did, for how blind and selfish I was. But I want to try. Not because of money or the company or anything else, but because I love you. Because you're the best thing that ever happened to me, and I was too stupid and self-centered to realize that I was taking you for granted every single day for 12 years. For the first time since the signing ceremony, Sarah's eyes softened a little, and I saw a glimpse of the woman I'd fallen in love with. I loved you too, Marcus. Past tense. That's why this hurts so much. I built my entire adult life around our partnership, around what I thought we were creating together. Finding out I was wrong about something so fundamental, something so central to my identity, it's like discovering the ground beneath my feet was never actually solid. Like I've been walking on air for 12 years and just now realized there's nothing holding me up. We agreed to move forward with Sarah's proposal. I called Tom that afternoon and told him to draw up new documents splitting the sale proceeds 60-40 in my favor, as Sarah had proposed. Tom didn't ask questions, didn't make comments, just said he'd have everything ready within a week. His voice was professional, but I could hear the relief in it. At least the deal could move forward. Richard Davidson was relieved to hear we'd worked things out, or at least worked out enough to proceed with the sale. He immediately reached out to Sarah directly to discuss her consulting arrangement. According to Tom, Richard offered Sarah $500,000 per month for 6 months of transition consulting, plus stock options in Davidson Industries. Sarah negotiated him up to $750,000 per month, I later learned. She also negotiated intellectual property rights to her frameworks, allowing her to use modified versions for Cornerstone Consulting. She was a better negotiator than I'd ever been. The signing ceremony was rescheduled for May 15th, exactly 1 month after the original date. This time, there was no celebration, no catering, no champagne. Just us, the lawyers, and the Davidson Industries team. Sarah and I arrived separately. We sat next to each other at the conference table, but barely spoke. When we did speak, it was purely professional, discussing documents and signatures and logistics. The ease we'd once had with each other was gone, replaced by awkward formality. Tom walked through the documents, and this time there were no surprises. Sarah signed her acknowledgement that she was an employee with no ownership stake. I signed the sale documents. Sarah signed her separate consulting agreement with Davidson Industries. Richard Davidson gave a brief speech about how excited they were to bring TechVault into the Davidson family, how they looked forward to working with both of us during the transition. Everyone applauded politely, but it felt hollow. Afterwards, there was a small reception. Several people approached Sarah to congratulate her and wish her well with her new consulting firm. Word had clearly gotten around about what she was doing. I noticed she had business cards already printed. Sarah Thompson, founder and CEO, Cornerstone Consulting. The cards were elegant, professional, confident. The name made me sad. We'd called TechVault our cornerstone for years, our foundation. Now Sarah was taking that foundation and building something new, something that was entirely hers, something I had no part of. I watched her from across the room, networking with people, laughing at someone's joke, looking more confident and alive than she had in weeks. She was moving on. The signing ceremony ended, and Sarah left without saying goodbye to me. Just walked out with Emma, who'd come to support her. I stood there watching her go, feeling the finality of it. A week after the signing, the money hit our accounts. $480 million for me, $320 million for Sarah, our shared bank account. More than either of us had ever imagined having in our entire lives. I called Sarah to make sure she'd received the transfer, to make sure there were no issues. She confirmed she had. Her voice was businesslike, distant. Then there was an awkward silence, the kind we'd never had in our relationship before. We'd always had easy conversation, always had things to talk about. Now we had nothing. Finally, I asked if she'd like to get dinner sometime. Not to talk about business, I clarified. Just to talk. As friends, maybe. Or as two people who used to be friends and were trying to figure out if they could be again. Sarah said she'd think about it. Her tone wasn't encouraging. Another week passed before she agreed. She sent me a text. Friday, 7 p.m. Piccolo. Just dinner. Piccolo was a small Italian restaurant we used to go to when we were first dating, back in 2014 when we were broke, and splitting a pasta dish seemed romantic rather than necessary. Back when everything was simple, and we believed we could conquer the world together. Sitting across from Sarah in that familiar booth felt surreal, like traveling back in time, but finding everything different. We'd been to this restaurant dozens of times over the years, celebrated small victories here, commiserated over setbacks. But everything was different now. The ease was gone, the trust was broken. We were strangers who happened to know everything about each other. Sarah looked good, better than good actually, rested. There was color in her cheeks again. She'd cut her hair shorter, into a sleek bob that framed her face. She was wearing a dress I'd never seen before, something stylish and expensive. She looked like a successful CEO, which I suppose she was now. I told her she looked beautiful. She smiled slightly and said, "Thank you," but there was no warmth in it. We made small talk for a while, dancing around anything meaningful. I asked about her consulting firm. She said she'd signed 6 clients now and was looking at office space in Oakland, near Jack London Square. She'd hired 2 people already, both former TechVault employees who'd left to follow her. I told her about how I'd been trying to figure out what to do with my life now that TechVault was sold. I'd been getting offers from venture capital firms who wanted me as an advisor, from other tech companies who wanted me to join their leadership teams, from people who wanted me to start another company. But nothing felt right. Everything felt empty, meaningless without Sarah. She said she understood that feeling of being unmoored, of having your identity tied to something, and then having that thing end. Midway through dinner, after we'd both had a glass of wine and the conversation had become slightly less stiff, Sarah said something that surprised me. "I've been angry at you for the past 6 weeks, and I had every right to be, but I've also been thinking about my own role in what happened, about my own mistakes." I started to say she didn't have any blame in this, that it was all my fault, but she held up her hand. "Let me finish. Yes, you should have made me a legal partner. Yes, you handled the ownership structure terribly. Yes, you failed me as a husband and as a business partner. But I also made a mistake. I never asked. In 12 years, I never once asked to see the corporate documents. I never asked about equity or ownership percentages or legal structure. I just assumed, and that was naive." She took a sip of her wine, choosing her words carefully. I've been thinking about why I did that, why I was so passive about something so important. And I think part of it was fear. I was afraid to ask, afraid that if I pushed for official recognition, for legal partnership, it would make me seem ungrateful or demanding, or like I was trying to take something I hadn't earned, like I'd be admitting I didn't trust you. I leaned forward, needing her to hear this. Sarah, you earned partnership 1,000 times over. You earned it the day you quit your job to help me. You earned it every time you landed a client or solved a problem I couldn't solve, or kept our company running when I was buried in code. You earned it every single day for 12 years. She nodded slowly. I know that now, but for a long time, I had this voice in my head telling me I should be grateful just to be included. That because you started TechVault before we met, it was your company and I was lucky you let me be part of it. That's messed up, right? But it's what I internalized. It's what I believed. I thought about all the times Sarah had downplayed her own contributions, all the times she'd deflected praise or redirected credit to me. How she'd always say, "We accomplished something" when talking about TechVault, even when it was clearly her achievement. How she'd once told an interviewer that her role was supporting Marcus's vision, when the truth was she'd shaped that vision as much as I had, maybe more. We both made mistakes, I said, reaching across the table tentatively. I should have insisted on making you a partner. You should have insisted on being recognized as one. We both let the situation continue because confronting it was uncomfortable, because it challenged assumptions we weren't ready to examine. Sarah agreed, and for the first time in weeks, she didn't pull away when I touched her hand. I think we fell into traditional patterns without realizing it or questioning them. You were the founder, the technical genius, the visionary. I was the supportive wife, the operations person, the one who made things run smoothly. Those roles felt natural, especially in tech culture where technical skills are valued over everything else. So we never questioned them, but they weren't equal, and somewhere deep down, we both knew it. We were quiet for a moment, just holding hands across the table like we used to. Then Sarah said, "I've been seeing a therapist, Dr. Martinez. She's been helping me process all of this. She asked me what I would have wanted differently if I could go back and change things, if I could start over. I asked what Sarah had told her, genuinely curious. I said I would have wanted you to see me, really see me, not as your wife or your employee or the person who handles the stuff you don't want to deal with, but as your actual partner, someone whose work was as valuable as yours, whose ideas were as important, whose name should have been next to yours on every document from day one." Her eyes got wet, tears threatening to spill over. "I would have wanted to matter, not because I was married to you, but because I earned it through my own merit and contributions." I reached across the table and took both her hands now. She didn't pull away this time. "You did matter, Sarah. You do matter. I was too blind and too self-absorbed to show it properly, to acknowledge it legally and officially. But you were always the reason TechVault succeeded, not me, not the software, you." She squeezed my hands. "I'm starting to believe that. Not because you're saying it now, but because building Cornerstone is showing me what I'm capable of on my own. I don't need TechVault or your validation anymore to prove my worth. I can create value by myself. I have skills and knowledge and relationships that are mine, not ours." There was pride in her voice, and something else too. Independence, freedom, self-knowledge. I realized that as painful as this whole experience had been, it had freed Sarah from something she'd been carrying for years. For 12 years, she'd built her identity around being my partner, around our company, around what we were creating together. She'd defined herself in relation to me. Now she was discovering who she was on her own terms, what she could build when she wasn't in anyone's shadow. "I'm proud of you," I said, and I meant it deeply, for starting Cornerstone, for standing up for yourself, for not accepting less than you deserved, for having the courage to walk away from something that wasn't serving you. Sarah smiled, and this time it was a real smile, one that reached her eyes. "Thank you. That means something, hearing you say that." Then she said something I wasn't expecting, something that gave me the first real hope I'd had in weeks. "I've been thinking about forgiveness, about whether I can forgive you for what happened, for the years of being invisible, for the humiliation at the signing." My heart started beating faster, hope and fear mixing in my chest. "I think I can forgive you, Marcus. Not because what you did was okay, because it wasn't, But because I understand you better now, you weren't trying to hurt me. You weren't maliciously keeping me down. You were just oblivious, selfish, in a passive, unthinking way. And I contributed to that by never demanding better, by accepting whatever role you assigned me without question." She paused, and I held my breath. "But forgiveness doesn't mean we go back to how things were. I can't do that. I can't be in a relationship where I'm not seen as fully equal, where I have to fight to be recognized, where legal documents don't reflect the reality of our partnership." I asked what she was saying, afraid to hope, but unable to stop myself. Sarah took a deep breath, like she was about to jump off a cliff. "I think we need to separate. Not divorce, not necessarily, but separate, for now. I need time to build my own life, my own success, my own identity that isn't tied to you or TechVault or what we used to have. And you need time to figure out who you are when you're not the center of your own universe, when you're not the genius founder everyone defers to." It hurt, but I understood. I could see the logic in it, the necessity. "How long?" She shook her head. "I don't know. Maybe 6 months, maybe a year. Maybe we'll realize we're better apart than together. But I can't try to fix our marriage while I'm still so angry and hurt and confused about who I am without you. I need to heal first. I need to prove to myself that I can stand on my own before I can think about standing beside you again." I agreed, even though it was the hardest thing I'd ever agreed to. It was what Sarah needed, and after 12 years of not giving her what she needed, the least I could do was give her this. "Whatever you need," I said. "Whatever timeline works for you. I'll be here when you're ready, if you're ever ready." We finished dinner, and for the first time since the wine incident, the conversation felt almost normal. We talked about our families, about our mutual friends, about funny memories from the early TechVault days. We remembered the time our first office flooded, and we'd spent an entire weekend mopping water and moving equipment. We laughed about the client who had insisted on communicating only through haiku for 3 months. We reminisced about our wedding, about how nervous we'd both been, about how perfect the day had been. For a few hours, we were just Marcus and Sarah again, two people who'd loved each other and built something together before everything fell apart. When we left the restaurant, we stood awkwardly on the sidewalk. Sarah moved in and hugged me, the first physical contact we'd had beyond holding hands since the signing ceremony. I held her tightly, breathing in her familiar scent, feeling the shape of her against me, trying to memorize the feeling in case it was the last time. "I'll call you," she said when we pulled apart. "We can have dinner again next month, see how we're both doing." I nodded, not trusting my voice. I watched her walk to her car, watched her drive away, and felt like I was watching my entire life disappear around a corner. Sarah moved out of our apartment 2 weeks later, in early June. She got a place in Oakland, a modern loft near Jack London Square, close to where she was setting up Cornerstone's first office. We agreed to have dinner once a month to check in with each other, to stay connected, but otherwise to give each other space and time to figure ourselves out. The first few months were brutal, the hardest time of my entire life. I'd wake up reaching for her and remember she wasn't there. I'd have something I wanted to tell her, some thought or observation or joke, and realize I couldn't just call her anymore. I'd see something that would make her laugh, a meme or a news article or a random interaction on the street, and have no one to share it with. The apartment felt like a mausoleum, full of ghosts and memories, but empty of life. I threw myself into trying to figure out my next move professionally. I'd always assumed I'd start another company right away, ride the momentum of TechVault's success into the next big thing. But I discovered I didn't have the energy or motivation or drive. For the first time in my adult life, since I'd quit my job in 2013 to start TechVault, I wasn't working 80 hours a week. I had money, more than I could spend in several lifetimes. I had time, endless stretches of it with nothing to fill it. I had freedom, complete and total. And I had no idea what to do with any of it. I started going to therapy in July, something I'd always resisted before. I'd thought therapy was for people who couldn't solve their own problems, which, now that I think about it, is exactly the kind of arrogant thinking that got me into this mess. My therapist, Dr. Rodriguez, was in his 60s, had been practicing for 30 years, and had a way of asking simple questions that completely unraveled me. He asked me to describe my relationship with Sarah. As I talked, patterns emerged that I'd never noticed, that I'd been too close to see. How I'd always positioned myself as the leader and her as the support. the visionary and the implementer, the genius and the operator. How I'd internalized the narrative, common in tech culture, that technical skills were more valuable than interpersonal ones, that building software was more important than building businesses. How I'd confused being the founder with being the only one who mattered. Dr. Rodriguez asked me where these beliefs came from, and I had to really think about it. I traced them back to my father, who'd been an engineer and had always emphasized technical expertise over everything else. He used to say, "People who can't do, manage. People who can do, build." I'd absorbed that message without questioning it. I traced them to the tech culture I'd grown up in, the Silicon Valley mythology where young male coders were gods and everyone else was peripheral, where the 10x engineer was celebrated and the people who actually made companies function were invisible. I traced them to 1,000 small moments throughout my life where I'd been praised for my technical brilliance while Sarah's contributions were taken for granted or dismissed as soft skills. "Do you think Sarah's work was less valuable than yours?" Dr. Rodriguez asked me during one session in August. "No," I said immediately defensively. "Of course not. I've said that. I recognize how important she was." "Then why did you treat it that way?" The question hit me like a punch. I wanted to argue that I hadn't treated Sarah's work as less valuable, but the evidence said otherwise. The ownership structure said otherwise. The way I'd talked about TechVault said otherwise. The way I'd positioned myself in interviews and presentations said otherwise. I'd said I valued Sarah's contributions, but my actions told a different story. I'd been performing equality while maintaining hierarchy. I didn't have a good answer for Dr. Rodriguez. Over the months, I started to understand something painful and humbling. I'd thought of myself as a good person, a good husband, someone who valued equality and partnership and fairness. But my actions told a different story. I'd benefited from an unequal system and had been too comfortable to change it, too comfortable to even acknowledge the inequality. I'd taken credit for success that wasn't entirely mine, success that arguably wasn't even primarily mine. I'd let Sarah sacrifice everything while maintaining all the power and security for myself. It was a humbling realization, the kind that makes you question everything you thought you knew about yourself. I'd always been the hero of my own story, the underdog entrepreneur who built something from nothing. But what if I'd actually been the villain? Or not the villain exactly, but not the hero either. What if I'd been the obstacle Sarah had to overcome to achieve her own success? Meanwhile, Sarah's consulting firm was taking off in ways that were remarkable to watch. I followed Cornerstone's progress from a distance, partly because I was genuinely interested, partly because it was the only way to feel connected to Sarah. In June, she announced 3 new clients. In July, 5 more. By August, she'd hired a team of 8 people, all former operations executives from other tech companies who wanted to work with her specifically. In September, Forbes published a profile of her titled, "The Woman Rebuilding Business Operations from the Ground Up." I read the article 3 times, feeling proud and sad and regretful all at once. The article described her journey from TechVault to Cornerstone, though it was diplomatic about the reasons for her departure. It mentioned that she'd been a key executive at a successful security software company, but had decided to strike out on her own to have more control over her career. Sarah was quoted saying something that cut right through me. "Sometimes you have to step away from what's comfortable to discover what you're truly capable of." I'm grateful for my time at my previous company, but building Cornerstone has shown me I was limiting myself by staying in someone else's shadow. I was letting someone else's vision define my own potential. Reading that hurt, but it was also accurate and fair. I had overshadowed her, even if I hadn't meant to, even if I hadn't been conscious of it. The article went on to describe Sarah's operational frameworks in detail, how companies were implementing them, and seeing dramatic improvements in efficiency and employee satisfaction. Several CEOs were quoted praising her work. One said, "Sarah doesn't just make companies run better, she fundamentally changes how they think about operations. She's a visionary, and we're lucky she's finally getting the recognition she deserves." Our monthly dinners continued throughout the summer and into fall. They were often awkward at first, both of us unsure how to relate to each other outside the context of work or marriage or the crisis we'd been through. But gradually, slowly, we started to rediscover the connection we'd had before TechVault consumed our lives, before we became just business partners who happened to be married. We talked about books we were reading. We discussed politics and current events. We shared stories about our families and mutual friends. We laughed at shared memories from our early days together, before everything got so complicated. We were becoming friends again, but a different kind of friends than before, more honest, more careful, more aware of the potential to hurt each other. 8 months after our separation, in February 2026, I made a decision that felt both right and terrifying. I called Sarah and asked if we could meet for coffee. I had something I wanted to talk to her about, something I'd been thinking about for months. We met at the same coffee shop in Oakland where she'd laid out her proposal the previous spring. I pulled out a folder, consciously mirroring what she'd done back then. It felt full circle in a way that was both painful and appropriate. "I've been thinking about what to do with my life," I said once we'd gotten our coffees and sat down. "And I realized something. I don't want to start another company. I don't want to go work for a VC firm or be a consultant or be an advisor. What I want is to invest in people like you, people who have brilliant ideas and incredible skills, but get overlooked because they're not the stereotypical tech founder." I slid a document across to Sarah. "This is a proposal for a venture fund, focused specifically on investing in operational excellence, not just funding cool technology or disruptive apps or the next social media platform, but funding people who understand how to build sustainable, well-run businesses. People who prioritize company culture, efficient systems, human capital, the things you spent 12 years building at TechVault that I was too blind to value properly." Sarah looked at the proposal, her eyebrows raised in surprise. "You want to be a VC? You?" I shook my head. "Not exactly. I want to build something different. A fund that values the kind of work you do. The kind of work that traditionally gets overlooked in the tech industry where everyone just cares about innovation and disruption and rapid growth. I want to fund the operators, the people who actually make companies work." I pulled out another document, and this was the one that made my hands shake. "These are partnership papers, 50-50 ownership, equal decision-making authority, both our names on everything from day one, co-founders in the truest sense. If you're interested." Sarah stared at the papers for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she looked up at me. "Marcus, I have Cornerstone. I'm building my own thing. Why would I give that up to go into business with you again? Why would I trust you after what happened?" I'd expected this question, had prepared for it. "You wouldn't give it up. Cornerstone could be one of our portfolio companies. We'd invest in it, help it grow faster, give you access to capital and connections, but you'd maintain full operational control. It would still be yours. This fund would be something else, something separate, something we build together. Actually together this time, with everything equal from the start." She was quiet, processing. I continued, needing to get all the words out. "I know I destroyed your trust. I know I failed you as a partner in every possible way, but I've spent the past 8 months trying to understand why and trying to change, trying to become someone different. I'm not asking you to come back to our marriage, Sarah. I understand if that's over, if there's too much damage to repair, but I'm asking if you'd be willing to build something new with me, something that's structured correctly from the beginning, something that proves I've actually learned from my mistakes, not just apologized for them." Sarah looked at me for a long time, her eyes searching my face. "I need to think about it. This is a big decision. I need to talk to my therapist, talk to Emma, talk to my lawyer. I need time." I told her to take all the time she needed. We finished our coffee and went our separate ways. 2 weeks later, Sarah called. She'd thought about my proposal and talked it over with everyone who mattered in her life. She had conditions if she was going to consider it, conditions that were non-negotiable. First, we'd need to hire a mediator to help us establish clear boundaries and communication protocols. We needed professional help to make sure we didn't fall into the same patterns that had destroyed our previous partnership. Second, everything would be documented legally from day one, with both of us having independent lawyers review every document before signing. No assumptions, no verbal agreements, no trusting that things would work out. Everything in writing, everything clear, everything equal. Third, we'd have a clear exit strategy if either of us wanted out. Buy-sell agreements, valuation methods, dispute resolution processes. We'd planned for the possibility of failure from the beginning. And fourth, the personal and professional would stay completely separate. If we did this, it was a business partnership, nothing more. Our marriage, or lack thereof, would be a separate issue that we'd deal with separately. I agreed to all of it immediately, without hesitation. We spent the next 3 months building the framework for what we eventually called Cornerstone Capital. The name was Sarah's idea again. If we're going to do this, let's make it clear this is built on what I created, not what you created. Let's make it clear whose foundation we're building on this time. I loved it. I loved that Sarah was claiming her own legacy, her own identity, her own place in the story. We brought in mediators and lawyers and advisors. We had difficult conversations about decision-making, about power dynamics, about how to handle disagreements, about what would happen if one of us wanted to date other people, or if our personal relationship changed. We built in safeguards and checks and balances. We made sure everything was documented and clear and unambiguous. It was exhausting and sometimes frustrating, and there were moments when I thought it would never work, when I thought we were too damaged to ever build something together again. But it was also the healthiest business relationship I'd ever been part of, because this time, we weren't making assumptions. We were building something intentionally equal from the ground up. Cornerstone Capital officially launched in June 2026, 1 year and 2 months after the disastrous TechVault signing ceremony. Our thesis was simple, but we believed revolutionary. Invest in companies that prioritized operational excellence, sustainable growth, and genuine partnership. We focused particularly on companies founded by people who'd traditionally been overlooked by venture capital, women, people over 40, people from non-technical backgrounds, people who understood business operations and company culture and human dynamics. Our first investment was in a healthcare logistics company founded by a former hospital administrator named Jennifer, who'd spent 20 years working in healthcare before starting her own company. She reminded me of Sarah, brilliant and overlooked, building something valuable that traditional VCs didn't understand. Our second was in an education technology company founded by 2 teachers who'd identified a real problem in classrooms and built a practical solution. Our third was in a manufacturing firm that had revolutionized supply chain management through better operational systems. None of them fit the typical VC mold of young technical founders in hoodies pitching disruptive moonshot ideas. All of them were building sustainable, profitable businesses that solved real problems. Within 6 months, our portfolio was outperforming most traditional venture funds. It turned out that betting on operational excellence and experienced founders was actually a pretty good strategy, that maybe the traditional VC approach of funding young technical founders and hoping for explosive growth wasn't the only path to success. As Sarah and I worked together on Cornerstone Capital, something unexpected happened. We started to genuinely enjoy each other's company again. Not as romantic partners, not yet, but as real colleagues. As actual equals in a way we'd never been at TechVault. We disagreed sometimes about which companies to invest in, about how to structure deals, about strategic direction. But we'd built in processes for handling disagreements. We'd each have our say, present our reasoning, and then make a decision together. Sometimes Sarah won the argument, sometimes I did, sometimes we compromised. But it was always a genuine discussion between equals, not me making the decision and Sarah implementing it. We challenged each other, pushed each other to think differently, forced each other to defend our positions. But it was respectful, constructive, built on mutual respect rather than hierarchy. We shared credit for our successes and took joint responsibility for our failures. When Forbes wrote about Cornerstone Capital's success, they quoted both of us equally. When we presented at conferences, we alternated who spoke. When portfolio companies praised us, they thanked us both. About 14 months after our separation, in August 2026, after a long day of meetings with a potential portfolio company in Seattle, Sarah and I went to dinner. It was supposed to be a working dinner, discussing whether to invest in the company we just met with. But we ended up just talking about other things, about life and family and the future. At the end of the night, as we were walking back to our hotel, Sarah said something I'd been hoping to hear but hadn't wanted to push for. I think I'm ready to try again, not to go back to what we had before, because that's dead and buried, but to build something new, together. I stopped walking, turned to face her. Are you sure? I don't want you to feel pressured. I don't want you to do this because we work well together professionally or because it would be convenient. I want you to do it because you actually want to. She smiled, and it was the warmest smile I'd seen from her in over a year. "I'm sure you've proven over the past year that you can be an actual partner, that you can share power and credit and decision-making, that you see me as an equal, not just in words but in actions. And I've proven to myself that I don't need you to validate my worth. I know what I'm capable of now. I know what I bring to the table. So if we do this, we do it as equals, or not at all." I agreed without hesitation, my heart feeling lighter than it had in months. We started dating again, which was strange and wonderful, given that we were still legally married and were business partners. But it felt like starting fresh, like building a relationship on a new foundation, a foundation of honesty and equality and mutual respect, rather than assumptions and convenience and traditional gender roles. We went to couples therapy together, working through what had happened and how to prevent it from happening again. We had hard conversations about trust and betrayal and forgiveness, about what we each needed from a relationship, about how to maintain our independence while also being partners, about how to make sure we both felt seen and valued and equal. We dated for 6 months, taking it slow, rebuilding trust gradually. Even then, when Sarah finally moved back into our apartment in February 2027, almost 2 years after she'd moved out, we kept some things separate. Sarah maintained her own bank account, her own financial independence, her own legal protections. We got our prenup updated to reflect our current situation, making sure everything was clear and fair and documented. These weren't signs of distrust. They were signs of health, of learning from our mistakes, of recognizing that love doesn't require losing yourself in another person, that partnership doesn't mean surrendering your autonomy, that commitment doesn't mean making yourself vulnerable to being erased. 2 years after the disastrous signing ceremony in April 2028, Sarah and I stood in front of our friends and family and renewed our wedding vows. It was a small ceremony, just the people who mattered most to us, held in the same vineyard in Napa where we'd gotten married the first time. But everything was different this time. Emma was Sarah's maid of honor, and she gave a toast that made everyone laugh and cry. 2 years ago, I didn't think Marcus and Sarah would make it, Emma said, raising her glass. Marcus had broken my sister's heart in the worst possible way. He'd taken her for granted, failed to see her value, let her be invisible for 12 years. And honestly, I wanted to kill him. Everyone laughed, including me. Emma continued, her voice getting more serious. But what I've watched since then is something I didn't expect. I've watched 2 people actually learning and growing and changing. Not just saying they'd changed, not just apologizing and hoping that would be enough, but proving it through their actions every single day for 2 years. Proving it in how they built their business together. Proving it in how they rebuilt their relationship. Proving it in how they show up for each other now. She looked at Sarah, tears in her eyes. "Sarah, you taught me that sometimes stepping away is the bravest thing you can do. That sometimes you have to lose everything to find yourself. And Marcus," she turned to me, "you taught me that change is actually possible if you're willing to do the hard work, to face your own failures, to become someone new." She raised her glass higher. "To Marcus and Sarah, may your second chance be even better than your first. May you never forget what you almost lost, and may you never stop seeing each other clearly." It was. Our second chance was better than our first, not because everything was perfect, but because we'd learned how to be real partners. We'd learned how to share power and credit and responsibility. We'd learned how to see each other clearly, instead of through the distorting lens of assumptions and traditional roles and unconscious biases. Cornerstone Capital continued to grow and succeed. After 3 years, we had 35 companies in our portfolio, and it helped create over 2,000 jobs. We'd proven that investing in operational excellence and experienced non-traditional founders wasn't just morally right, but financially successful. Other venture firms started copying our model, which Sarah and I took as the highest compliment. Several of our portfolio companies had successful exits, making significant returns for us and our investors. But more important than the money, more satisfying than the financial success, was the impact. We were helping people like Sarah, people who'd been overlooked or undervalued or dismissed by traditional venture capital. We were giving them the resources and support and recognition they deserved. One of the highlights came in 2029, when we invested in a company founded by a woman named Patricia, who'd spent 18 years as a VP at a major tech company, building their entire operational infrastructure from scratch. When the company was sold for $600 million, Patricia discovered she had no equity, just like Sarah. Her story was so similar to Sarah's that when she pitched us, Sarah had tears in her eyes. We didn't just invest in Patricia's company. Sarah mentored her personally, helping her avoid the mistakes we'd made, helping her build something that was truly hers from day one. Watching Sarah empower other women who'd been through similar experiences was one of the most beautiful things I'd ever seen. As I sit here writing this, 5 years after that wine-soaked signing ceremony, 5 years after the worst day of our marriage became the catalyst for rebuilding it better, Sarah and I are in our home office working on Cornerstone Capital's annual report. Our marriage isn't perfect. We still disagree sometimes. We still have to actively work to maintain equality and clear communication. Old patterns still try to reassert themselves, and we have to consciously push back against them. But it's real, in a way our first marriage never was. We're partners in every sense that matters, legally, financially, emotionally, and practically. Every document has both our names. Every decision is made jointly. Every success is shared equally. Every failure is handled together. Looking back, I wish I could say I'd known all along how valuable Sarah was, that I'd always seen her clearly, that I'd never taken her for granted. But the truth is, I didn't. I was blind and arrogant and selfish. It took losing her to understand what I had. It took watching her succeed independently to recognize her brilliance. It took having to prove myself worthy of being her partner to understand what partnership actually means. If you're building something with someone you love, whether it's a business or a marriage or any other kind of partnership, I hope you learn from our mistakes. Don't let assumptions replace actual agreements. Don't let comfort prevent difficult conversations. Don't wait for a crisis to recognize and honor your partner's contributions. Make them a real partner from day one, legally and practically and emotionally, not just in words. Value their work as much as you value your own. See them clearly as they actually are, not as you've imagined them to be or as traditional roles suggest they should be. Put it in writing, document everything, protect their interests as much as your own. And if you've already made the mistakes we made, if you're the person who took your partner for granted or failed to give them what they deserved or let them be invisible while you took credit, know that it's not too late. Change is possible. Redemption is possible. Growth is possible. But only if you're willing to actually do the work, to actually share power, to actually become the partner you should have been from the start. It won't be easy. Sarah and I spent years rebuilding what I'd broken, but it was worth every difficult conversation, every uncomfortable moment of accountability, every time I had to prove through actions rather than words that I'd changed. Because now I have what I should have valued all along, a true partner, an equal, someone who stands beside me, not behind me, someone whose name is on every document, whose voice carries equal weight, whose contributions are recognized and valued and honored. And that's worth more than any amount of money or success or recognition. So, let me ask you this, and I want you to really think about it. If you're building something with someone, are they truly your partner? Not in feelings or intentions, but in legal reality. Do they have equal power, equal recognition, equal reward for their contributions? Or are you making the same mistake I made, assuming goodwill is enough without putting it in writing, letting traditional dynamics play out without questioning them? And if you're the person whose contributions aren't recognized, whose work is undervalued, whose partnership is more assumption than reality, I hope Sarah's story gives you courage. You deserve to be seen. You deserve to be valued. You deserve to have your contributions recognized, not just emotionally, but legally and practically. Don't wait 12 years to ask for what you've earned. Don't make your worth dependent on someone else's willingness to finally see you. Build your own cornerstone, whether that's within your current partnership or outside of it. Demand equality from day one. And if you don't get it, have the courage to walk away and build something that's truly yours, because you are enough, with or without someone else's validation. That's what Sarah taught me. That's what almost losing her forced me to understand. And that's what I hope you take from our story. Thank you for watching. If this story resonated with you, let us know in the comments. Have you ever been in a situation where your contributions weren't recognized? How did you handle it? What would you do if you were in Sarah's position? Would you have thrown the wine, or would you have walked away quietly? Would you have given Marcus a second chance, or would that betrayal have been unforgivable? And please subscribe so you don't miss our next story. Until then, remember, the strongest partnerships are built on equality, honesty, documentation, and the courage to have difficult conversations before they become crises. Don't let assumptions destroy what you're building. Don't let traditional roles define your worth. And never, ever let someone make you invisible.